Have you ever played a game so great that after you finished it, it just left you wanting more? Well, for me, that game is none other than Mafia Definitive Edition, the remake of the original Mafia game that was released all the way back in 2002 for the PC. The original Mafia, to many, is considered to be a pretty damn good game, and I mean visually for 2002 it looked pretty good. However, playing the original game nowadays is pretty much impossible. The original Mafia, while great at its core, is filled with so much jank that it can be hard to go back to nowadays. Whether that be the driving, the terrible console ports, or just some of the gameplay mechanics in general having aged poorly, the original Mafia certainly isn't an easy game to go back to nowadays, especially if you've never played it to begin with. The other big problem is that as good as the story of the original Mafia was, the devs of the original clearly wanted to tell a more cinematic story, and while I'd say they more or less accomplished it to a degree, it still wasn't to the level of quality they probably wanted it to be at. The voice acting in the original wasn't all that great, and oftentimes scenes that were meant to be more emotional or impactful just fell flat. Fast forward to 2014, and by this point, the original developers of Mafia 1, Illusion Softworks, had been long since acquired by 2K and renamed to 2K Czech. Under this new name, they'd go on to co-develop Mafia 3 with a new studio called Hangar 13, and in 2016, Mafia 3 would be released to very mixed reviews. After Mafia 3's disappointing release, the Mafia series was pretty much dormant. That would all change though in 2020 when Hangar 13 announced the definitive editions of the Mafia trilogy. Mafia 2 and 3's definitive editions would be the first to release in May and would be nothing more than simple remasters with DLC included. The big one though was Mafia 1's definitive edition, which was set to be a full-on, from the ground up remake of the original Mafia. Mafia 1, the definitive edition, would end up releasing in September of 2020 to overwhelming praise. This was an incredibly faithful remake of the original game and did just about everything a remake could do right. It made characters more fleshed out, made the story more cinematic and interesting than ever, and most importantly, it brought the Mafia series back into a positive light again. Even today, 5 years later after its release, Mafia Definitive Edition is one of the greatest remakes I have ever played, and hell, it did so well that we ended up getting a new Mafia game entirely with Old Country. Without further ado though, let's go back and take a look at the cinematic masterpiece that is Mafia the Definitive Edition. First things first, let's get one thing out of the way. If you're not familiar with the Mafia series, the story is always the main focus, while the gameplay itself is pretty much an afterthought. Now, not to say the gameplay of the Mafia games is bad per se, it's just not what you play these games for. The gameplay of Mafia Definitive Edition mostly consists of shooting your way through enemies, a little bit of stealth here and there, and a lot of driving around. Now repeat that for about 10 hours as you progress through a linear story experience, and that's generally how the gameplay of Mafia works. On top of all that, the one thing that makes Mafia, well, Mafia is the police presence. Unlike GTA or any other open world style game with a police system, the police in this game do care if you pass red lights or go over the speed limit, which may sound annoying, but as long as you're not actively speeding or anything in front of a cop, you won't get caught, which is nice. Now, as I said, the gameplay is fine for what it is, but the story has always been the strongest aspect of the Mafia games, and it all started with the very first game in the series. Now, as I said earlier, the original Mafia had an incredible story, however, the voice acting and a lot of the important story moments in the game were not handled all that great. Thankfully, that original game's story would be done justice in the definitive edition, as now the game feels more like the cinematic masterpiece that the developers wanted the original game to be from the start in 2002. The game begins in the year 1938 and gives us an establishing shot of the setting of the game, the city of Lost Heaven. Lost Heaven is largely based off of 1930s Chicago, and if I'm being honest, it's definitely one of the best video game cities I've ever seen. Anyways, eventually we get to see our main protagonist, Tommy Angelo, Mr. Mafia himself, talking to a detective, and immediately this first scene does a great job of hooking you into the story, even with it being nothing more than Tommy Tommy and Detective Norman talking for a couple minutes, it gets you thinking about what could have possibly happened to have led to this situation unfolding. The only thing we even find out in this initial scene is that Tommy has information on the Morello case that he's willing to trade to Detective Norman in exchange for protection from someone. After this, we're taken back to 1930 when Tommy was a cab driver and when he met Polly and Sam, two mobsters on the run from a rival gang. After driving Polly and Sam to the safety of a bar belonging to Don Salieri, Tommy is given money as compensation for his help. This mission, for being the first one in the game, is absolutely incredible. Oftentimes, I feel like games have a habit of making their missions slow in order to ease you in and then gradually ramp things up over time. Red Dead 2. Mafia, on the other hand, does not mess around in its first mission, as you're thrown straight into a pretty intense car chase, which ends up setting you up for the rest of the driving and chase sequences you'll experience later on in the game. The next mission, Running Man, has you doing taxi fares initially until Tommy gets jumped by two guys from Don Morello's crew and has to run to Polly and Sam for help. This then leads to us getting introduced to Don Salieri himself, as well as his right-hand man, Frank Coletti. Salieri tells us to take revenge on Morello's crew by smashing up some of their cars at Don Morello's lounge bar. After we destroy the Morello crew's cars, Tommy is then welcomed into the Salieri family in what's probably one of the weakest oath scenes in the entire series. For comparison, Mafia 2's scene of Joe and Vito being made was tense and it felt more accurate to how the Mafia actually did things. I mean, yeah, there's nothing inherently wrong with this scene, it gets the job done, but I do think more could have been done to have made the moment feel more important. Anyways, after Tommy gets made, he goes with Sam and Polly for collections, which results in Polly and Sam being wounded, but hey, we got the money, so everything worked out. We're then taken back to 1938 when Tommy offers up more information about Don Morello and how in 1930, Morello killed a boxer by the name of Joey Crackers in the middle of the street, and since Morello had all the cops paid off in the city, they could do nothing but watch in horror as Joey was killed. Following this is the next mission, Fair Play, also known as bitch, Jesus Christ! Mafia 1's racing mission is infamous for being the hardest mission in the entire series, if not the hardest mission when it comes to gaming in general. And if I'm being honest, it's definitely a struggle. Now, if you're like me and have plenty of experience with racing games, it might not be that difficult to you. But if you don't though, now, it's important to note, I did this race on medium difficulty, which by Mafia 1 standards means I'm a bitch. Doing this race on classic difficulty is the real way to do it. It makes the race 1,000 times harder, just like it was in the original game. Anyways, after winning the race, we get introduced to Sarah as a character, and start to see her and Tommy's relationship in its early stages. That is, until we end up having to take a drunken Polly back home, or to the Blue Tropics Gentleman Club like I did, because why not, you know? The next mission sees us walking Sarah home from work to protect her from the guys outside of her apartment. After beating them up, Sarah takes Tommy into her apartment to patch him up, further establishing their relationship together. Following all that, Don Salieri sends Tommy and the gang to go kill those same punks who messed with Sarah. Following a high-speed chase with the punks through town, they end up crashing into a pole, and we see that Tommy is a little hesitant to kill the punks as one of them begs to be left alive. One thing I always liked about Tommy as a character is that he's not just some stone cold killer, as he actually has some form of moral compass that prevents him from just killing for the hell of it, at least early on anyways. But it does make him gradually turning into a killer over the course of the game feel more natural, as you get to see how the life of being a mafioso really changes him as a person. With both the punks presumed dead, Polly and Tommy leave the scene until they later find out that one of the punks actually survived the car accident and would be in attendance for the funeral of the punk that Polly had killed. We also find out that the punk that died, Billy Galati, was the son of a city councilman, which was a problem all within itself. So with that, Sam is tasked with attending Billy's funeral, while Tommy is given the task of going to a brothel to silence the manager of it for doing business with Don Morello. On top of that, Tommy was also tasked with taking out a woman that had worked there, who coincidentally had been seen earlier in the game with Sam after the race mission, and as it turns out, she had been providing Morello's crew through with information on Salieri. Sam ends up telling us that the woman shouldn't have to die for his mistakes of telling her too much about the business, and hands Tommy $100 to give her to keep her quiet. Once Tommy gets to the brothel, he kills the manager, gives the woman $100, blows up the manager's office, and leaves to get to the church where the punk's funeral is still actively going on. After accidentally getting spotted at the church, we shoot our way through and end up regrouping with Sam and escape from the cops in a hearse. After this, Tommy, Sam, and Polly are forced to lie low for a while due to how much of a mess the church shootout was. This then takes us back to the present of 1938, where Tommy reveals to Detective Norman more about Frank and how he always kept him and everyone else working for Salieri in check. In a flashback scene, Frank tells Tommy about how the Don tried to drown a dog when they were kids, giving us more of an insight to how the Don is as a character, as well as the Don and Frank's history together. Before I explain the rest of the story, I want to very briefly talk about the atmosphere and visuals of the game, because man, it's all so good. Every aspect of Lost Heaven is wonderfully crafted, and it all feels so lively. Sure, it's not the most exciting location ever, as there's little to do around the city, but honestly, that's its only real flaw. In this story, the lack of activities in the world really isn't that big of an issue because you're too engaged in the narrative to even care. What does matter though is how the city looks and feels. Lost Heaven is filled to the brim with life, from NPCs roaming around as if they actually have things to do, and the constant traffic in the streets. It all helps elevate the experience and really gets you more immersed in the world. The next act of the story takes us to 1933 with the mission A Trip to the Country, in which Frank sends Tommy to help Sam and Polly retrieve a shipment of booze sent from Canada. Upon arriving at the location, things quickly go haywire as Polly and Tom are ambushed, which leads to a shootout. After realizing that the ambushers were feds paid off by Morello, they then had to rescue Sam before the feds get to him as well. Unfortunately, Sam ends up getting wounded, so after another shootout, we get Sam to the truck we arrived in and take him to the doctor to be saved. 2 months later, Tommy meets with Salieri and is informed there's a mole in the family, which is very quickly revealed to be Frank. So knowing this information, we find Frank, tail him to the airport, and end up letting him skip town with his family rather than killing him. As a result, a fake funeral is held to make Salieri believe Frank was actually killed, and after that, it's all done and over with. The following mission sees us infiltrating a villa belonging to a prosecutor who has evidence on the Salieri family for the killing of Billy Galati. After infiltrating the villa, we crack the safe and escape the evidence to destroy it. The final mission of the 1933 chapter of the game has Polly, Sam, and Tommy meeting with a former whiskey supplier for Morello named Gates, as he's been frustrated with how Morello has treated him lately and wants to work with Salieri instead. Polly ends up punching Gates in an attempt to stage the interaction as a robbery, and then everything goes bad when Morello's men turn up. After shooting our way through the parking garage, we deliver the whiskey back to Salieri and everything is good. The next set of missions took place in 1935, and by this point, Tommy's now married and the rest of the Salieri family is doing well for themselves. This is also the year that Morello finally met his end. The first mission sees Salieri and Tommy getting ambushed at a restaurant by Morello's men, as Carlo, another member of the Salieri family, had ratted them out to Morello. Carlo then fucking dies. Happy birthday! This mission sees us sneaking onto a boat hitman style and killing Billy Galati's father, who is working with Morello as the first step to bring Morello out of hiding. After that, we end up going after Sergio Morello. In an attempt to kill him, we end up placing a bomb on his car. Unfortunately for Tommy, rather than Sergio being the one to get into the car, it ends up being an innocent woman, which leaves Tommy shocked. This game does not hold back in what it's willing to do to progress the narrative, and if anything, it does a great job of capturing the harsh reality of being involved with the mob. I mean, Tommy just watched an innocent woman die, and he's basically told to just move on and continue with the mission of killing Sergio, which eventually does happen. After we kill Sergio, we finally go after Don Morello himself and kill him following a plane crash. Don Morello's death is definitely handled far better in the remake than it was in the original, as you actually get to see Morello die. In the original, you never get to see Morello after the plane crash, but in the remake, his death is definitely a lot more impactful. Following Morello's death, Salieri was able to gain control of the whole city and as a result, had no one left to stand in his way. Back to the present of 1938, Detective Norman realizes that Tommy is the guy he's been looking for in relation to the Morello case and that he's offering him Salieri in exchange for protection. The last couple missions all take place in 1938, with the first one having us take down a politician whose main goal is to stop organized crime altogether. After assassinating him, Tommy returns back home to Sarah, only to find out that the politician who we just killed played a big part in getting the 19th Amendment passed, which gave women the right to vote, which Tommy, of course, was unaware of. All he knew was what Salieri told him, and it showed that Tommy was no longer the same man he once was. Now he was simply just taking orders without asking questions or thinking about the consequences, and was essentially blinded by the way of life he had been living for the past 8 years. For the next mission, titled Just for Relaxation, Salieri tells Paulie, Sam, and Tommy that there's a shipment of cigars being used as cover for what's actually diamonds, so of course we have to go retrieve it. On the way there, Paulie talks about robbing a bank, and the boys are a bit nervous about it, but they agree to stay silent about it and not tell Salieri. After retrieving the quote-unquote diamonds, we then load them into the truck and escape. Once we arrive back, we find out that the diamonds were actually dope, and by this point, it's pretty obvious that Salieri's gone off the deep end, as earlier on in the game, he stated he wouldn't get into the business of selling drugs, but lo and behold, that sentiment didn't seem to last. Sam ends up going back to the bar with Don Salieri, while Paulie and Tommy take the train to discuss their big bank heist. While on the train, we get to hear more from Paulie as he talks about his goals in life, which really makes you feel for him, as you clearly see that he no longer wants to live in Salieri's shadow. A few days later, Paulie and Tommy head to the bank to rob it and manage to pull off the heist successfully, when Paulie tells Tom that they'll split the score the next day at his apartment. This then takes us into our final mission, simply called the Death of Art. Tommy heads to Paulie's apartment to get his cut of the money, but upon arriving, he finds Paulie dead on the ground with a gunshot wound to the head. This scene is the biggest example of the remake handling the story better than the original, as in the original game, Tommy seems like he cares more about the money than Paulie, which devalues their friendship a bit in my opinion. While still at Paulie's apartment, Tom gets a call from Sam, saying he was calling to warn Paulie, but it was too late. Tom tells Sam he needs help getting Sarah and his daughter out of town, and to meet him at the city gallery. With that, Sam agrees and we head straight there. Once we arrive at the city gallery, we find out Sam was the one that killed Paulie all along. Sam's betrayal, no matter how many times I replay this game, is one that always gets to me because it works so well. He always had Tommy and Paulie's backs through everything, but when he had to make the choice between them and the business, he chose the business. His loyalty to the Don was more important to him in the end than his loyalty to his friends, which is why Sam did what he did. Sam then reveals that Salieri knew about Frank being alive, as well as the woman that we left alive at the brothel. After Sam's monologue, we're given the objective of chasing him through the gallery and killing him. Once we catch up to Sam, we end up wounding him, and it's here where we get to hear from him for the very last time in a moment that's incredibly heartbreaking to watch, especially having seen how close Sam, Paulie, and Tom had gotten throughout the course of the game. But as with most Mafia stories, they tend to never have happy endings. Fast forward to 1951, and we get to see an old Tommy at his daughter's wedding, which is great to see considering everything else we just went through. It's revealed that after Tommy ratted out Salieri, he spent some time in jail along with the rest of the family, and when he was let free, came out a new man. We then get our final scene of the game where Tommy waters the plants in his front yard as a red car pulls up belonging to none other than Mr. Mafia 2 himself, Vito Scaletta, and his friend Joe Barbaro. With that, Vito and Joe deliver one final message from Don Salieri and murder Tommy in his own yard. The end. Overall, the story of Mafia the Definitive Edition is, in my opinion, the greatest story ever told in video game history. It took the already pretty fantastic story of the original and made it better than ever. Every character in this game is memorable, the voice acting is top notch, and the cinematography of the cutscenes is so good you feel like you're watching a movie at times. What I especially love about this game is the dynamic between all the characters. The bond between Paulie, Sam, and Tommy always felt unbreakable during the game, making their deaths feel emotional. And as you play through the game, you see how much of an effect Sarah has on Tommy, making him realize that maybe the life of crime isn't the best route to go down. Another great thing about the story is every character in this game has their own goals and aspirations that give them depth. Salieri wants to take full control of the city away from Don Morello. Frank just wants to live the rest of his life being with his family. Paulie wanted to leave the life of crime behind to pursue his dream of opening a pizzeria, and out of all of them, Tommy was the only one who got what he wanted. He lived a full enough life and got to see his daughter get married until his past mistakes caught back up with him and resulted in his death. Nothing in this story is ever left without a conclusion, and I think that's what makes it so fantastic. Every little thing you do matters, and nothing is gone to waste. This is a story that pulls no punches and isn't afraid to take risks. The big question though is, what do you do when you finish the story? Well, you turn to the free ride mode, of course, which allows you to explore Lost Heaven at your own pace, as well as complete these special side objectives exclusive to the mode. Now, the mode is very bare bones, with the missions being all there really is to do, but its inclusion means that the city of Lost Heaven doesn't go to waste, which I absolutely love. On top of that, there's a ton of collectibles such as cigarette cards and comics that you can find hidden all around the map. That's about all there is though when it comes to side content, as outside of the story, there's not much else to do that's really worthwhile. Mafia The Definitive Edition is a perfect remake by all accounts. Now sure, does it have its fair share of bugs and glitches? Most definitely. However, the remake manages to tell its story so well and looks so good visually that half the time I never even noticed the bugs and glitches due to how immersed I was. Honestly, with how good this remake is, I'm surprised we still haven't gotten a Mafia 2 remake yet. How they even made brand new models for Vito and Joe specifically for this game and never used them for anything else outside of the ending scene. So while I love this remake and Mafia 1 as a whole, Hanger 13, I'm begging you, please remake Mafia 2 next.